It's the real news. I'm Aaron Mate. Iran is in the midst of its largest and deadliest protests since 2009. Thousands of people have taken to the streets across the country to voice frustration over a stagnating economy, the ruling clerical regime, and Iran's foreign policy. More than 20 people have been killed and over 530 arrested. Some of the protests have turned violent with attacks on police stations, banks, and mosques. The Iranian government has threatened a major crackdown, but according to Reuters, has largely been restrained so far, holding back the elite forces that have crushed past uprisings. Dariush Arjmandi is an exiled Iranian political activist and a member of the Organization of Revolutionary Workers of Iran, an Iranian socialist group. Dariush, welcome. Just explain to us how these protests began and what are the main grievances of those taking to the streets.
Thank you for having me. You see, it started actually a year ago, at least after the election. And we've had daily demonstration and protest in different cities. Workers who are demanding getting paid because they haven't got paid for the last 6 months and 9 months and up to a year. Teachers, nurses, young people, unemployed people, especially women, were also organized in teachers unions and different things. And they have been protesting. People who lost their money and all their savings in different financial scams run by Iranian government and the people in power. So they have been protesting and they haven't got anywhere. And so as a result, you see the anger is showing itself nowadays.
And describe the scale of these protests. They've been coming from places that we don't normally hear about when talking about Iranian politics, not just in Tehran, but around the country.
Yeah, it is one of the aspects of very important because usually it's in the great cities, in the big cities in Tehran and Mashhad and other. But this time it spread itself to the cities that I haven't heard about. And it's both it's more than 70 cities in the whole Iran are protesting. And that's a great thing because it shows that it is ordinary people everywhere.
And comparing this to the 2009 Green Revolution, is it fair to say that, back then, I mean, those were huge protests, but a lot of people, a lot of key sectors stayed out of it for the most part, including members of the clergy and trade workers, if that's a fair characterization of 2009. Is that any different now? And who are the demographics who are taking part today?
Today is mostly, as I said before, it's mostly the people who've been protesting during the last months. People like teachers, like women who are protesting against all kind of discriminations, young people, unemployed people, and people who are demanding better paid and better life. And I think it is mostly ordinary people, poor people, working class, and that's why we see this all over the country. If you compare it to the 88, I think one of the other aspects which is important to point out is the last time it was the protest against the election and how it was stolen from people. But the people, mostly middle-class people, they were hoping that, especially reformist fraction of the government, would help them somehow. But I think the difference this time is that people gone beyond the different fractions of the regime, and they trying to create a movement for their own future, and they rely on their own power and organizing.
All right, Dariush, so just to explain that for anyone who's not familiar with the recent history. So when you talk about discontent over the election being stolen from the Iranian people, you're referring right to the election of the last election of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, right? When it was widely perceived that the vote was rigged in his favor. And that discontent is one of the reasons why it said that the Ayatollahs allowed this time the reformer Rouhani to win the recent elections, which was a vote of confidence for a reform agenda and in engaging with the West. So if now there is discontent with Rouhani and the message is to him that he's not delivering, what are the main issues with how Rouhani has governed since taking office? Because his re-election was only in June, right? So he hasn't had that much time back in office.
No. Of course, you have to understand that the main reason people voted for Rouhani wasn't because they thought he was a great miracle worker or anything like that. It was mostly because people didn't want the other candidate to get elected, and now they see that nothing happened, and of course they're angry and they demand a better life. We've had the budget proposal last week or so, and you could see there that just like United States, they're increasing the military budget when the things that people care about, like environmental issues, like better wages for workers and things like that, there is no sign of it in the budget proposal. So, of course, people,
Right. Okay. So the issue of the military that you mentioned goes to the issue of Iran's foreign policy, which, although it appeared as if the protests started off about the economy, unemployment, we've seen recently people chanting in the streets against Iran's foreign policy, specifically saying that we don't want to be involved in Syria supporting Assad. We don't want to be supporting Hezbollah in Lebanon. We don't want to be supporting Hamas. We want money and energy spent on us, on the people. So this goes to Iran's foreign policy in the region. And on this front, I want to play a clip of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, where he came out and made a video voicing support, he said, for the Iranian people.
This regime tries desperately to sow hate between us, but they won't succeed. And when this regime finally falls, and one day it will, Iranians and Israelis will be great friends once again. I wish the Iranian people success in their noble quest for freedom.
So that's Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying that the Iranian government will one day fall. So, Dariush, I'm curious for you as an exiled Iranian political activist, how do you navigate this issue where on the one hand you have people like Netanyahu and Trump and Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, I think you would agree, cynically using Iran's internal situation to further their own regime change agenda. And how do you square that off with, your own aspirations for Iran and wanting to see a democratic representative government and change from within?
Yeah. First of all, when Netanyahu talks about Iranian people's rights and things like that, it sounds like a cruel joke, because when you see how what he's doing against Palestinian people, you understand that he doesn't care about people's rights. And it's just like when on the other side, when the Iranian supreme leader defends Palestinian people's rights, they may hate each other. They have different agendas and different interests. But I think what they have in common, all of them, both Iranian regime and the United States, Trump, Netanyahu, and bin Salman, that's their hatred for a real democracy in the Middle East, because that is something they all hate, and they would try their best to stop the movement to going on this direction, because creation of a real democracy in Iran would spread like a hell's fire throughout the Middle East, and it is not something that they want. That would be a great disaster for all of them. So I think they would try to influence the movement, to give each other excuse, the very excuse that Iranian regime are trying to find and they're seeking, just to say that, you see, this is Israel and America and Ben Salman supporting these people, and these are not Iranian people, these are agents of Daesh and Islamic IS and things like that. So to suppress the people and their movement even further. So I think it's important to point out this issue. And I think what is important right now is that Iranian people are be able to continue their protests, to peaceful protests, and for the international community, and by international community, I don't mean the government of Israel or Saudis and others, but the unions, grassroots movements in different countries, to show their support for Iranian people and their demands for better life and for human rights and a democratic country. So.
Finally, briefly as we wrap, how do you see the issue of the sanctions here? In terms of, there was huge hope inside Iran and the expectation, rightfully, that the Iran nuclear deal, which Rouhani invested a lot of capital in, would have brought economic benefits and brought relief with money coming into the country. But since the nuclear deal has gone into effect, the U.S. Congress has passed laws that give the president and the Congress the authority to undermine it. And certainly Trump has run away with that. He has the uncertainty he's created around the Iran nuclear deal by recently decertifying it has deterred major banks from investing inside Iran because of the confusion and the uncertainty about what Trump is going to do. So the money has not come in that would have come in had Trump just respected the deal. So does that, for defenders of Rouhani to say that this is partly the U.S.'s fault for not living up to its side of the deal, is that a fair case to make?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that Iran is a capitalist country. We live in a world where few people have a greater wealth than half of the population of the world. Just like in your country, when you had this Trump's budget proposal that gives trillions of dollars to the rich people. I think it would be fair to understand that even in Iran, they would do the same thing, and they have been doing the same thing. Plus, that in Iran we have this savage capitalist system, plus one of the worst dictatorship in the human history. So, of course, any money coming from, doesn't matter from where it comes. Remember that during the Ahmadinejad, we had the highest oil prices in the history, and they had billions and the billions of dollars by selling the oil at high prices. But not $1 of those money went to the Iranian people. And that's why we see the people are angry, because they don't see any improvement in their daily life. And we, as I told you before, we have workers haven't been got any pay for last 9 months, and when they protest, they put their leaders in prison, just like Reza Shahabi that you spoke about before. And they have been killing union activists and other people just because they are demanding a better life. So I think it is not the issue actually for Iranian people. What is issue for Iranian people is that they demand to have a human rights, to have the right to freedom of speech and freedom of gathering, peaceful gathering and protest. And I hope that the international community would support them in this quest.
And fair enough. I guess my only point there is that it's long been a strategy of powerful actors on the world stage to squeeze countries that they oppose in a bid to turn societies against themselves. And certainly, Iran's problems are internal. You cannot blame everything on Western powers. But I can't help but wonder just would the situation be any different if if the sanctions relief had actually come, and if Iran was not just reliant on oil, but was allowed to have the investments in its country that other countries have?
To see any real difference in people's ordinary people's life, their daily life, I think we would need to have a different kind of political system and a different kind of government. And that's why Iranian people are demanding. As I said before, we had a lot of money during the Ahmadinejad, but not $1 of that went to the people and was used to make people's life better. So I don't think that is any issue. The issue is that our Iranian people have the right to have independent movement without external and internal involvement to make a better life for themselves and to demand a secular government, a secular system, and a democratic system to make their own future and make the life a little better or not.
We'll leave it there. Dariush Arjmandi, exiled Iranian political activist, member of Organization of Revolutionary Workers of Iran, an Iranian socialist group. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on The Real News.